quite interesting to exactly make that comparison between how developers tend to use certain tools here in San Francisco. And as soon as you look outside of this bubble, you realize that, I mean, yes, the technology is there and yes, it's making a huge impact, but there's still a lot of developers out there.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges is now people are saying, okay, I'm going to use this coding agent, I'm going to build something and it's done in 4 hours and it's working. Look, boss, it's working, right? Now we want to deploy that to production and you end up spending weeks, days, weeks, debugging the problems, whether that's scalability, whether that's, networking problems, environment variables. Here's something they go to their development team and they say, hey, this should be done in like a week, right? And this should be done in a day. So now there's a lot of pressure on developers, especially again, those that don't have the classic AI, experience that have to produce quickly. I'm going to be a little snarky here and say it's managers and executives. We know some executives that, they're very well read on what's going on in the AI space. I mean, what board, what CEO is not paying attention to this at this point?
AI coding agents promise end-to-end automation, but open source developers building real apps and workflows within their IDE keep hitting the same wall. Generated code is often single-threaded and non-scalable, because it copies existing patterns instead of developing for high performance. Complex AI pipelines become fragile. A small downstream change can ripple back and break unrelated stages. Agents also keep reinventing the wheel, rewiring infrastructure instead of using existing tools and libraries. RocketRide is an open source project that gives AI coding agents and humans scalable patterns to build on. Its core engine was built for petabyte-scale data processing and now abstracts the wiring between tools, libraries, LLMs, agents, and data. And today we're here with Joe Maionchi, COO and co-founder of RocketRide, to talk a little bit more about this. So thank you very much for being here today.
Thanks, Aaron.
All right. Well, I would like to start off this conversation by talking about what RocketRide believes in. And that is, if you can give us a little explanation as to what does it actually mean when you say your IDE is a new AI command center?
Great. Okay. Well, first of all, what does RocketRide believe in? Well, RocketRide started as a previous tool that was built to leverage companies' unstructured data. And as we started building this thing out, we realized the data wasn't quite the epicenter of what we were doing. We were actually building a tool to simplify the building and the construction of AI applications using a framework which we call pipelines. And we debated for a while whether we called it orchestration or workflows or pipelines. And each of those has a specific connotation, but we ended up sticking with pipelines because at the end of the day, you're really piping data through a series of tools, transformations, agents, LLMs, and so on to produce some sort of outcome. And what's also great about using pipelines as opposed to the broader orchestration, even though we do orchestrate things, is that it can be used as the primary piece of an application, or it can just be used as a part, right? And it can be plugged in to any part of the application to do something specific that we do well. So that's, what we believe in is now we've taken that engine and that capability and we've open sourced it and give it away for free because we believe we want to help all developers, regardless of their experience in AI, get to a certain level playing field where they can actually show results and be productive and, get encouraged on this journey. We live in this bubble in San Francisco. It's a really special place and it's the vanguard of AI development. A lot of people would say, I know there's innovation happening in other places, but here we're so surrounded by people that are pushing the envelope. But a lot of other parts of the world, they're still going through that, acceptance. And some people are even maybe still stuck on, maybe what AI was capable of doing a year ago. And we want to help them, still have a future in this industry and produce results. So that's what we believe in. We think we can help people. Mm-hmm. And specifically the people we're talking about is developers who are charged with building AI applications.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's quite interesting to exactly make that comparison between how developers tend to use certain tools here in San Francisco. And as soon as you look outside of this bubble, you realize that, I mean, yes, the technology is there and yes, it's making a huge impact, but there's still a lot of developers out there. Mostly also like somehow senior developers that are still trying to catch up with the wave. But they're surrounded by so many different technologies and news and new release that it's very difficult to filtrate that noise and just look for the signal. So I truly believe that's kind of like a trait here that we have in San Francisco. And in a way, yeah, it's RocketRide's role to guide the next generation of developers towards a more simplified future, right? Developing with the agents. But why the IDE? Like, because like in the slogan, we have your IDE as a new command, as your new
yeah. You had asked about that exactly. So, what does that really mean? It means that those developers that use IDEs don't have to forsake that IDE. In other words, we're enhancing the capability of IDEs to make it relevant in the era of AI. And it's not to say that IDEs couldn't do anything in the era of AI. There's a lot of other things that are happening within IDEs. But where were there some gaps? And one of them would be, okay, I'm building with agents, I'm building with LLMs, with AI tools, and something's not working. What kind of insights am I getting into really what's going on? How much am I really spending in terms of tokens, and where is that spend happening? Where's the latency coming from? And so that's one of the capabilities that we add into an IDE is that observability, right? To be able to drill down and see what arguments and data was passed at each segment of your pipeline. Again, the whole pipeline concept is meant to say it's made up of a bunch of segments and intersections and forks and so on. And so now you can actually drill as deep down and in any part of the pipeline to see what's happening and identify what's going on or where there's waste or where you can optimize. So observability was one key aspect. And then the other one really is, okay, I can just have an AI coding agent just write the whole thing. I'm a believer that there's a distinct difference between the non-technical or technical but non-developer persona who's building AI with AI and developers who have that traditional developer technical background building AI with AI. There's a bit of a difference. And there's a term out there called citizen developer, which is sort of meant for that former group. And again, I'm oversimplifying, and there's all shades of gray here. But in that idea, the citizen developer provides a detailed description of what they want. They give it to the AI coding agent. It builds it. They might iterate a few times, but they're not introspecting the code. They're not guiding deep architecture. They're just looking at the result. I'm getting the result I want. That's one category. But then you have your developers. And again, these are the people who really care about how it's built. They care about reusability, maintainability, scalability, security, those things. And they have a strong idea or sense of how that works. And I know we're going to talk about this AI coding, but we provide, in a nutshell, we provide just a light framework for the AI coding agents to use to build applications in a somewhat of a cohesive way. Because if you build 10 applications using AI coding agents, you might get 10 different architectures, 10 different implementations. Kind of depends on where it's sourcing its information from, what kind of guidance you give it. But this is just some tracks that it can follow to get some really good benefits out of the box, which we can dive into at some point.
Correct. Yeah. So I think that all these coding agents have really unlocked also a new, let's say, segment among developers. You mentioned about citizens and like those hardcore developers, right? But I think like I see more than now than ever, designers, like non-technical people now hopping into the IDE because they have the help of Claude Code or Cursor or Codex, right? So I wonder, do you think that RocketRide has something to offer for those like also very like intermediate to entry level developers that they can somehow benefit off of RocketRide, but also have that higher level of usability for those more experienced developers? Like, do you think RocketRide somehow caters to both of these new targets?
If you had asked me that question 3 weeks ago, I would have said, yeah, we're not really targeting those individuals. And, a lot happens in 3 weeks, right? So we set out to really help developers building AI applications, developers. Okay. But in the last few weeks, I've encountered multiple people who don't have a developer background who have now picked up an IDE. And, IDE is a developer tool and they're starting to use it. And if you think about the context of RocketRide, even though we didn't intend for it to be for non-technical background people, non-developer people, I think it's actually providing benefit to those individuals because, again, you think about that observability. If you're a developer, do you really need that visualization of observability and charting of the different compute and memory utilization and so on? Technically, you can dive into the logs, you can read standard out, but again, if you don't have a developer background, maybe you're not doing those things. So these kinds of capabilities built into the IDE, enhanced with RocketRide, actually do make it easier for people to enter into that development ecosystem. So yes, today I would say, yeah, I've learned something. And yes, we can actually help some of those people. And probably it's going to be a growing audience for us.
Correct. So you've talked about observability. We also slightly brushed over scalability. But in your opinion, what are the top challenges that developers now face when trying to develop a production-ready AI solution?
I'm going to be a little snarky here and say it's managers and executives. We know some executives that, they're very well read on what's going on in the AI space. I mean, what board, what CEO is not paying attention to this at this point? Yeah. And so they hear something, they go to their development team and they say, hey, this should be done in like a week, right? And this should be done in a day. So now there's a lot of pressure on developers, especially, again, those that don't have the classic AI, experience that have to produce quickly. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges is now people are saying, okay, I'm going to use this coding agent. I'm going to build something and it's done in 4 hours and it's working. Look, boss, it's working, right? Now we want to deploy that to production and you end up spending weeks, days, weeks, debugging the problems, whether that's scalability, whether that's, networking problems, environment variables, right? I mean, you name it. And again, RocketRide aims to bridge some of that gap by building on a framework and an engine that's already proven for petabyte scale. And so with that, you kind of get it out of the box. I'm not saying we solve every scalability problem. You still have to provision the right level of compute resources needed to run it at whatever scale you want. And again, we can also touch on the RocketRide Cloud that's coming next month. Sure. But the open source offering doesn't lock you into any proprietary host. You can host it yourself. So obviously you still have to take care of that. But the application itself that you build is built for scale using RocketRide, and so that's a big advantage.
And I wonder if maybe you can share a little bit of that. Maybe not all the secret sauce, but I wonder how does RocketRide achieve such scalable architecture? I think a lot of people hearing this podcast might also wonder, what is the difference? How do you compare that to, let's say, other AI orchestration workflow builders? What is the main difference?
Well, I mean, if you're just not going to take my word for it, then I guess I do have to explain something. So this, the back end of, what RocketRide is, and again, it's open source. Anybody can go look at it and check it out. We affectionately call it our engine. I think the official name of it now is RocketRide Server, but it's our engine. It's built using C++, and it was built to process large amounts of data at scale for enterprise, right? And it's the back end for our sister company that we spun off of Observability, which does unstructured data intelligence and automation, again at scale. And so that engine is the same engine. In fact, that open source engine is being used in that product as well. So we already have 2 companies consuming this solution, but that was its primary purpose, right? Whether that was, as I say, processing data at scale, but also doing data transformations, data normalization, redactions, classifications, and data actions, right? All of that's handled at scale out capability using our engine. So that's the open source solution. And I don't really need to talk too much about it in the sense that we've released that in open source so people can check it out and run it themselves. And I really don't want to say too much because I think people should be encouraged to go and prove me wrong, right? Go out there and try it. That's I think we're going to win people over.
Yeah. Is there any specific reason why has RocketRide decided to go open source? Like, what is the main driver behind this?
Well, as we evolved our thinking around this pipeline builder, we acknowledged that our ICP, the people that we were building this for, was a vastly different audience than the parent company, which was targeting enterprises and IT administrators and business leaders. And so if you're targeting developers and you want developer adoption, we all know open source is a great way to do that because a lot of developers are going to not pay the licensing fee to try out, no matter how cool it is, without getting to try it first. And then you're talking about having a licensing model and a free version and all that. But it's a lot that just removes barriers to entry. Another reason, and again, I think it's really important to mention that while we don't have the open source in independent governance yet, it's kind of a catch-22. We want to open source with a foundation that has certain requirements on adoption. So we're currently managing that thing, but the idea is to give the control and the governance over to an independent third party, nonprofit, so that builds trust that you can actually put your effort as a developer into contributing to this thing, whether it's fixing bugs, enhancing it, introducing, advancing the architecture. And it's not just some company that's just trying to get free labor, right? We're truly giving it out for free. It has the most permissive open source license that we could choose, the MIT license, and so people can use it however they want, and they can even spin up their own clouds and host it themselves. So that again entices people to give it a try and know that if they do put some time and effort into it, that it's going for the benefit of the community and not a single entity.
Yeah, no, I do think that going to open source truly makes you feel like authentic to the rest of the developers, and exactly, it delivers that trust that most of these developers need to actually have the buy-in from their management and be like, hey, we're going to deploy our solution using this framework, and it's backed up by all these associations, and it's been worked on by the community. So I truly think that it's also kind of like this new shift. Like, you see all these open source frameworks popping every day almost, and they truly become something amazing as soon as you start getting that community contribution as well, right? Because it's open, anyone can contribute. Yeah,
and I should throw in there that this open source, this code that we open source is actually quite valuable. There's some IP in there that we also made available. This software has millions of dollars of investment into it, so it's worth something.
Yeah.
I agree.
All right. So now I'd like to take a step back and going back into the whole IDE concept. So there is a clear divide between the IDE, or developers using IDE, and the CLI, or the terminal. So what do you think about that? What are the pros and cons, or just what is your personal take?
Yeah. So again, if you'd asked me that question like a month ago, I would have had a different answer. Look, it is clear that there's a resurgence of the terminal or CLI, and we market ourselves as an IDE extension. So why would somebody using the command line and Claude Code or whatever they use have any interest in using an IDE extension? Well, we've from the beginning also provided an SDK and an MCP server that are accessible outside of the IDE that give you all the same capabilities that come with our IDE extension. And so it actually doesn't really matter to us. We've been pivoting, starting with a definition of the type of developer that we're looking for as a developer using IDEs, which is, over 30 million developers in the world are using IDEs. And so we defined our market as that. But as I'm observing and kind of learning more about the pros and cons that are currently being discussed in the market about the benefits of CLIs and the benefits of IDEs, or is the IDE dead, and all this, it really, that whole debate to me highlights what are the pros and cons of each of these approaches, and what are the gaps, and how can we leverage our solution to address some of those gaps to the point where you don't have to choose, right? I mean, of course, people are going to have personal preference. I mean, I have a personal preference. But at the end of the day, we're going to be helping developers in the terminal write with code, or, through the IDE.
Okay. I mean, we've seen so far how, for instance, Cloud Code came and sort of redefined how the CLI should look. It's pretty seamless. It has a few little things that definitely give you the idea that you're using a coding agent within your CLI. But I mean, now all this coding is being done by agents. So how do you think that, or how do you foresee the IDE evolving in order to adapt to this new way of coding, which is purely agentic, yet again, talking about it can be in both sides of the balance. It could be non-developer or very low technical knowledge type of persona, and then you have your higher end developers. So how do you think that the IDE will evolve, or will it evolve?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to pretend to say that I know the future. This market is moving way too fast, and we can only guess. I think we start with the understanding that there are a bunch of new IDEs coming out on the market, right? And that includes some of these same vendors that are also promoting the command line interface and terminals. And I think the market is going to end up catering to both types of users. But will the IDE evolve? I think RocketRide's proof that IDEs are going to evolve, because we feel we are part of that evolution of IDEs towards AI development and agentic coding. So you asked how do I see agentic coding affecting the way IDEs are in the future? Mm-hmm. It starts with that concept that I touched on earlier, which is this tracks to provide to coding agents. When a coding agent is asked to construct or compose code based on a set of specs and requirements, where is it getting the information to write that code? It's been trained on a set of code, and it has access to code out there to use as a source, right? In order to develop the pattern and the right approach, again, based on that feedback loop. And again, a really skilled developer who's really good at agentic coding and has really mastered this back and forth and stopping it in the middle of doing something and interjecting when it sees it's doing something and going on the wrong track. That person is not most people today. And so what RocketRide does is it provides a set of, I like the word guardrails, but I know then that'll make people think about LLMs. But it's again, tracks that really ensure that the 10 apps, the 20 apps, the 30 apps, because we get overly fixated on building one app, but the reality is when that app's built and it's running, yeah, you're going to have to maintain it, you're going to have to extend it, but you're probably also going to work on another one and another one. And one of the great things about agentic coding is you can actually build multiple apps at the same time, with minimal context switching for yourself, because you're not actually getting in and writing the code yourself. You have a team working on that for you. And so this enables you to have certain reusable patterns that are proven, that give you certain benefits right out of the box. And so I think that agentic coding is needed. It needs something like RocketRide as one of the ways in which IDEs are going to improve. That observability that I mentioned is another. I think that the intersection of the pure CLI or terminal and IDEs, I think we're seeing a lot more convergence there as well. And then you talk about, the broader application. I haven't really put a lot of thought into what a citizen developer would need in an IDE, but we'd have to come back in another conversation and talk about that. But I think that they are going to influence what the IDE does because it is an abstraction layer from the code.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I just think like that abstraction interface like definitely already caters to these citizen developers. Ideally it's super simple to connect these nodes together and to create a full pipeline. Yet again, you can always let the AI take the lead and build that for you. But yeah, I think like just time will tell like what needs to be done so that it's a lot easier to I guess even process what your code is doing in a simple, interchangeable, and yet again scalable way.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've touched on that. The visualization aspect is going to become more and more important to those non-classically trained developers. We work with a very accomplished developer who prefers to learn via pictures and diagrams than text. That's a visualization.
Yeah.
Right. And that's something that's very common with a lot of people.
Yeah, different types of learning.
Exactly.
More visual, others are more auditory and so on. So okay, that's quite interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Joe. What's next for RocketRide? Like what is happening within the next, let's say, 2 months from now?
Well, if you talk about, are you talking about the company or are you talking about the solution that we provide? Because I think we probably want to stick to the technical side, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
From the tech side. Yeah.
So on the tech side, we really have two tracks. We are pushing hard to get as much adoption of our open source solution as possible. And that requires a lot of engagement with the community, building community around this, getting exposure. The more exposure we get, I think the more... obviously, there's some percentage of people that will see this and say, aha, this is what I've been looking for, right? We actually saw that at our hackathon this last weekend. It was pretty cool to see. So, but it's also a feedback loop, a continuous feedback loop. And we've started to get outside contributors now. I mean, I should probably mention we've only been released in open source 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So in the last 3 weeks, we've started to get outside contributors, which is great. And so we need to continue to build that. And we learned a lot from our hackathon last weekend. And we came up with, out of the big list of things that we saw, we came up with a list of 10 things that we were going to get done this week and do a new release before our next hackathon, which is next Monday. And then we're going to repeat that same process. So the open source side, some of the big things that we're adding, we had not yet put in the instructions and the guidelines for AI coding agents. We had something rough in there that wasn't applicable across the board. So this week we're finalizing our Agents MD that will enable coding agents to really just compose very complicated pipelines right out of the box without any coding. So that's one. We added some more nodes. We found that a lot of developers are really looking into vision and video processing and images, and so we've added some vision capabilities to our pipeline. And then we found quite a bit of bugs, things that we naturally work around because we know the code that new people stumbled over. So. Addressing those. So that's the kind of things that we're doing on the open source. It's going to be a continuous iteration loop. And we have a limited bandwidth to put into open source because of the other track, which is our cloud service. So RocketRide, as altruistic as we are, we do have to eventually make money in order to continue to support the developer community and provide all this capability for people to do whatever they want with it and never have to pay us a dime. But we have a whole other side, which is our cloud service. And our cloud service we're shooting to have that out next month. What does our cloud service do? It actually executes these pipelines at scale in production with additional benefits. And what are those benefits, right? Why would you choose to run your pipeline that you built with RocketRide open source in the RocketRide cloud? Well, my favorite one is cost. We have figured out a way to maximize the capacity of GPUs in a way that nobody's doing right now. And we believe, and again, that cloud service has to be up and running and people benchmark it and prove it. Our early benchmarks have proven this to ourselves, that we're going to be able to execute data-intensive data pipelines which support AI applications, practical applications using those pipelines at a significant lower cost than your current options on the market. And so I think just from an economic standpoint alone, if we actually can deliver on that promise, that's going to be a significant driver for people who aren't just building toys and prototypes and home projects, but if they're actually building an application that's going to be used by thousands of people, tens of thousands, millions of people, they're going to want to find a way to reduce the cost, the token cost, the GPU cost, the GPU memory, and we found a way to do that. Which we're not going to get into the details on because that's a trade secret, but that is going to be one of the main drivers. The other really cool feature, and this is not novel, that I've seen other vendors do this as a separate offering, but integrated into our platform as well, is going to be an ability to not have to get accounts with all of the third-party AI vendors out there. You can use your single account with RocketRide and get access to those tools, which will enable you to save on subscription costs, which usually have a floor that you have to pay, even if you don't end up using all of that capacity. Right. You'll only pay for what you use. But if we are successful with this cloud platform, we could be pushing quite a bit of volume through those third-party vendors and drive a lower per token cost for ourselves, which we can then also pass along to the end consumer. And so that will enable people to get access to a lot of these tools without having to manage accounts and API keys and so on, and save money that way as well. So save hassle and save money. So that's another feature. We're also looking at enabling enterprises with enterprise features, the table stakes you need at enterprise, whether that's auditing or compliance like SOC 2 and ISO and HIPAA, as well as team features. It's the sharing of pipelines, the collaboration that you'd need. Right now, there is no easy way to collaborate with the open source. You can do it. But in order to do that, you have to export your pipeline and send it to someone. So if you actually want to work on the same pipeline together in real time, that's something you'll be able to do in our cloud as well. So these are some of the benefits that you'll get out of the RocketRide Cloud. And of course, the other piece which we like to highlight is it'll be one click. So you compose and build this pipeline in your IDE, and then you just literally click a button, and now it's running in this cloud at whatever scale you've paid for. Correct. Right. So yeah, that's the other project, and that's going to take up a lot of our time over the next couple of months.
What about me as a developer who maybe comes up with a really novel way of using the product, like a specific pipeline? Would I have a way of not just sharing it with my team, but maybe I want to share it with the world? Would that be a possibility? Well,
Aaron, you're being a little stinker because, you're talking about something that we haven't really nailed down, but conceptually, we are looking into developing some sort of app store marketplace. And again, this is conceptual right now. It's not our primary business model, but what we're looking at adding, if there's demand, is a way for people to build great applications quickly and at scale with all the security and so on running in our cloud, and be able to then market that to others for use for whatever subscription they want to determine, and be able to grow their own business similar to any other app store that you would see out there. So yes, that is something we're looking into, and we've actually got a few apps that our internal team has built that we think have a real market. And so that might actually end up being the driver for us doing this just for ourselves. And I think, by the way, that's the best way to do anything, is make it work for yourself first before you try to sell it to someone else. So we've got a really cool app that one of our developers built that was built from a known market need that is very specific. And so we're getting ready to actually put that into the cloud as one of our first applications of the cloud when it comes out in a few weeks. And we'll see if that actually takes off. And again, that could be the seed for a potential app store.
And talking about now use cases like actual pipelines, what have been some pretty cool projects that you've seen in your own opinion that leveraged RocketRide that enabled what they did. Like before even RocketRide became a thing, like they probably would have not been able to deliver what they did. But what are some cool projects that you've seen? Maybe you can share that.
Well, okay, so one of our developers, again, I'll start with internal.
Yeah.
One of our developers, we've challenged all of our developers to be creative and think of ways and actually implement use cases using RocketRide and then promote that internally and externally. So two of our developers came up with the idea of a swimming application where basically the app tracks from video. So someone gets themselves filmed swimming, feeds that into this pipeline. Again, right now it's a pipeline, it's not a full application, but feeds it in and it analyzes the video, identifies the frames, and then feeds that to an LLM and comes up with a set of recommendations, observations on the swimming, the technique, improvements, as well as a training regimen. So this developer said that he came up with this idea because he had tried doing this not too long ago and couldn't get it to work. And he's a very smart developer. So he was able to compose this within a couple of days using RocketRide. And it's not that he couldn't have built this on his own, but I think he just didn't have enough time to do it. And with RocketRide, he was able to do it in a few days and get it working. It was literally between a Tuesday or a Wednesday and a Friday. So I would say a couple days.
Pretty fast.
Yeah, and he demoed it for us last Friday, and that was his description. I didn't have time to build this. It was too involved, and was able to get it, and he's going to use it. So that's one example. One example that we saw at our hackathon last weekend, it was one of the finalists was basically a product market fit application that they built using RocketRide. And what you do is you feed the website and your marketing materials in there, and then it goes out and it does a search against what market you're targeting, your ICP, and it comes back with a whole scoring mechanism. And that was really, really interesting. In fact, I actually want to try it this week because I think we've nailed down our product market fit, but still I'd be interested to see what their app says. So that was one I think has some legs. I think I found out from their LinkedIn post yesterday that they were in 2 hackathons at the same time. Oh, and they were bouncing between the 2, and they did the same app in both.
Oh, wow. That's
and in both they were in the finalists groups. Oh, wow. So I think they're trying to take this, further, and it sounds like RocketRide is going to be a part of that solution, which is really cool.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah. So those are 2 examples.
Yeah. Okay, that's really good. I guess lastly, I like to ask you, Joe, how do you think RocketRide will end up really, really differentiating itself among other developer tools, and like how will it become sticky? Like what is that stickiness that we're looking into having this?
Yeah, some of that involves a little bit of luck, but the key things I think about RocketRide, first, the fact that we've released it as open source. The second is that we have this engine that is very robust, that provides the scale and the abstraction layer to take away all of the glue code that you need, which, you need that glue code, but why write that yourself? Why have an AI agent compose it and do it differently in different scenarios? Again, it's a consistent, standardized framework for that. We call it substrate, right? I think that has a chance to become a standard. And of course, it's very difficult to become a standard, but you start off by building a community that uses it, and you get enough people using it. And I think that alone can make the open source piece sticky. And it's also just our approach to the AI application building, the way people build AI applications. It's not LLM centric. It's not agent centric. We are agnostic to all of the different tools. We bring them. It's kind of like what we did with data at Operavi. It didn't matter what your data was. At the end of the day, what was the data? It was a shell, the metadata describing the data, and then it was the data itself, one or more data streams. And when you took away all the differences, email, chat messages, PDFs, videos, audio, images, they all boil down to the same thing. And we do the same thing with all these tools and components. You know, they have now a standardized plug and play interface to abstract away the unnecessary differences while still letting you leverage the things that are different about them. And I think that can be something that really catches fire in the market if people like that approach. It's an approach.
Yeah.
But, you know, we also have to listen to the market and adapt. And I don't know that we've hit the mark yet. It's too early to tell. We're about to reach 2,000 downloads in 3 weeks, which is pretty cool. And close to 1,000 GitHub stars. So, you know, so far it feels encouraging, but we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
And we're still looking for that catch fire moment. So we'll see. And then, you know, you talk about the cloud. Again, if that cloud offering can truly run an AI application, a full AI application that's built with the infrastructure of it built using RocketRide AI pipelines, if that's true, and we can do that at a significant cost savings than running it anywhere else, if that really is true, that could be a game changer.
Yeah.
Right. And again, that's something that we came up with. Maybe somebody's going to come up with something similar at some point. But right now, we feel we have that advantage. That's why it's so important to get that cloud offering up and running soon, because, you know, we want to start that journey. But I think, you know, when you combine the certain approach that we've taken with open source with this potential, you know, look, we can have bake-offs, right?
Yeah.
Build, you know, have Claude Code or Codex or Gemini or whomever build that application outside of RocketRide, and then build the same with RocketRide, and then run your applications wherever you think is most optimal, and then run your RocketRide application in the RocketRide cloud. And if we come out ahead from a cost perspective, from a GPU memory utilization perspective, from a observability perspective, you know, you can clearly see exactly where that token spend is going, down to the individual token, the fraction of the token. You know, if all that value is proven, then we've got a shot.
Yeah.
I think we have something.
And I feel like it's already been sort of tested as well. Like I recently got a message from one of our teammates who are like internally who did a little bit of benchmarking, and it looks really, really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, we've got some evidence right now that we've really got something, but we've got to get out there in the market and prove it.
Exactly.
So
cool. Now, if someone wanted to use RocketRide, where can they find us? How can they interact with the tool?
So the best way, and I'm sure that's going to make our DevRels really happy, is go to our website, rocketride.org. Okay, and there you'll find links to download the extension, access our docs, join our Discord. Right now, we're primarily collaborating with people through Discord and through GitHub. But the website has all those links. That is our open source website. We will be launching another website specifically for the for-profit cloud, which will be RocketRide.ai, but that's only a landing page right now until that's ready. We are doing a bunch of different events. And so another way to interact with us besides those forums is to attend one of our events. And we have a hackathon on Monday, March 30th at the AWS Loft here in San Francisco. So if you want to get in, and it's I don't know if the list is full, but you know they can always message me. I've gotten in with the organizers.
Yeah.
Other than that, we have multiple events planned up until a launch event in June, which will be really huge and really fun. So yeah, events, website, GitHub, and Discord.
Joe, thank you very much for sharing all of those amazing thoughts, and really looking forward to how RocketRide evolves and how it actually creates something new out of the IDE and the CLI and helps other developers out there build their AI solutions faster and better.
Me too, Aaron.
So,
Thanks.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thanks.
All right. So there you have it. Today we spoke about what it actually means that your IDE becomes a new AI command center, how to actually deploy AI solutions with production-ready pipelines, and the future of agentic coding. So thank you very much. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you in the next one.